Hippocrates said many, many years ago that all disease begins in the gut, which also means on the flip side of that, all health begins in the gut, right? Because it's the foundations, it's the building blocks of us. So that's really what we're talking about when we're talking about gut health is how are each of those sections of the digestive tract working, either to set you up to win or not.
Are you ready to live your best life, make healthy choices, have success, have fun, and still have time for everything else? I'm here to teach you how to do that, and we'll all learn together from guests along the way as well. Follow along for some powerful tips on cultivating gratitude, making healthy choices for mind and body, and having fun doing it. What if all the angst and worry actually don't help? Oh my goodness, let's keep learning how to do this differently. OMG, hello everyone. I'm excited about today's episode. We have talked on this podcast about healthy habits and about food a few times. My take on the two types of food, fuel and fun, as well as the power of walking and the power of strength building. And I'm excited to continue our healthy habits journey today with a topic that I would say really sits at the basis of all of our health, and that's our gut health. I could go on and on about gut health and how important it is related to our brains and our bodies and our mood and all the things. But even better, I have an expert with me today who can do that better than I can. And so joining me today is Dr. Katie Collier. She's a naturopathic doctor located in Tennessee. Welcome.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. It's so good to be here.
This is going to be fun. I'm really excited about this topic. And actually, I've had people asking me, when is the gut health episode coming? We're so excited. So tell us your story, basically. How did you become interested in naturopathy and in gut health in particular?
Yeah, so great question. Yeah, originally, so I grew up in Pennsylvania, and then I went to university at Montana State for a period of time, and originally had gone to study to be an elementary school teacher. And so I landed in Montana, and I had really struggled with my own personal gut health, which I feel like if there's really like two key pathways that people find naturopathic medicine or functional medicine, it's either you've been sick yourself or someone you love has been sick, and it's been very hard to find answers. And so I fall into one of two of those categories, which is I was personally struggling with a lot of gut health issues in my high school years and, like kind of early 20s. And so I moved to Montana, and I had never heard of naturopathic medicine. I had been to, specialist after specialist and just really finding not a lot of answers and not getting anywhere. And so as a last ditch effort, which again, I feel like is a lot of my patient population is like, well, we'll try this, I guess. And so, I had walked into Dr. Tanda Cook's office pushing 15 years ago now. And at the time I think it was her first year in practice, and she had a physical clinic in Bozeman, Montana. And so I went, and I actually was seeing her business partner at the time, and it completely changed my life, right? Like, wow. I had never heard of naturopathic medicine. Of all of the people that I had gone to see, no one had talked about my diet. No one had talked about supplements or about stress or, all of the key players that can influence our gut health. And I just felt really seen. It was like the most different interaction with a physician that I had had, and I had had a lot at that point. And I felt really seen, and I felt like what was possible for my health. It's like not just looking for what was wrong, but what was possible. What were the changes that I could make to be in a healthier body and have a healthier life and just be overall, feel better. And so I found naturopathic medicine through that way, and it completely changed the trajectory of my life. I decided to not complete school as an elementary school teacher, and I went back and got my degree in nutrition, and then ultimately went to med school myself. So that's kind of how I landed there. It was just a long-winded way of, healing myself, really.
That's an amazing story, and I love it. It's interesting how many of my guests on this podcast say something along the lines of what you said. It's almost as if, I'm going to use the word accidentally, and I'm not meaning exactly accidentally, but it's almost as if we sort of stepped into what we were meant to do, and we didn't even realize it until we got there. And I love that because it feels like maybe it really was meant to be.
And they say it's like the things that we bump up against in life, ultimately are our greatest teachers, but also what we then in turn can turn around and teach others, right? It's because what we know best. So it's not a mistake that I, had the journey that I did, or that I walked into Tanda's door, or, that we're on this podcast today, right? It's like can only connect the dots looking backwards, as my husband always says. So
Good point. Good point. Hindsight is 2020, and we just kind of keep going forward and see what happens.
totally.
Absolutely. Well, I love that. And so let's kind of dive into what we even mean when we say gut health, because you're right. A lot of my listeners are kind of waiting on this episode and knowing how important it is, but there will be some who maybe just know that gut health is a trendy term, but are not really sure what we're talking about and why. So tell us a little bit more.
No, it's such a good point. Like, really, what even is gut health? Like, what is our gut? What does it do? Right. So really going back to the basics. So essentially, our digestive system is it's an open tube from our mouth to our anus, right? It's we are consuming things from the outside world that then we have to break down, absorb, and build to build us, right? Like we break them down into the smallest building blocks to then create us, right? It's also a massive boundary. It's our boundary to the outside world. And so, being selective of what we're absorbing, what we're breaking down, what we're eating. And, we're not plants. We don't photosynthesize, but we actually have to consume food from the outside world. And that's the start of you, right? It's like what you are eating and what you are consuming. And, taking it one step further, it's not just what you're eating, it's what you're absorbing, right? Like you're not just what you eat, you're what you absorb. So how is that barrier and is that sieve working properly, right? Are we allowing what we want to allow in? Are we keeping what we want to keep out? And it's all like from our mouth to our anus at every level, is every section of the digestive tract, because they all have different jobs, are all of them working properly, and are they all working in concert with one another? And so gut health is, really just optimizing all of that. It's optimizing how we're digesting, it's optimizing enzyme function, and then it's optimizing absorption, and then optimizing elimination, right? It's like at every level, really supporting the gut at every level. And Hippocrates said many, many years ago that all disease begins in the gut, which also means on the flip side of that, all health begins in the gut, right? Because it's the foundations, it's the building blocks of us. So that's really what we're talking about when we're talking about gut health, is how are each of those sections of the digestive tract working, either to set you up to win or not, right?
And I see how important that is, certainly, because obviously you're saying the food we take in is what's creating us. It's giving us our energy. It's giving us everything we need to live. Fully agree with that. What I wanted to ask when you were saying that is, we can eat good foods all day long. And at the same time, it sounds like you're saying our body doesn't necessarily use them if the gut's not functioning properly. So there's kind of like more to it than just eating healthy. Is that fair to say?
Yes, totally. I mean, there's kind of two answers to that question. So first of all is, what is actually present in our food? Like if we go down to like brass tacks of what we're actually digesting and what we're absorbing, we also have to step back and what's present in our food, right? So, a carrot's not a carrot, it's not a carrot. It actually matters what soil that carrot has been grown in. And if the soil is depleted, then that nutrient profile, those minerals, those vitamins in that said carrot, they're not going to be as many in that carrot if there were in this like really beautiful, rich, diverse soil, right? So that is rich in those minerals themselves. So even going back into our food supply, right? Like our agriculture system. And then, talking about the insults to our gut, right? It's like the food that we're eating. If we're eating a diet that's really high in processed foods, or, foods that will trigger that inflammatory response, we're putting a stress on the system, right? And if that system is stressed, it's not able to do its job as well as it would be if it wasn't stressed, right? So we can consume that carrot, but if our gut has been damaged for a multitude of reasons, I mean, going back to like whether you were a vaginal birth or a cesarean birth, right? It's like that is the initial population of your microbiome, right? So
Really?
so it's actually inoculated through the birth canal, actually through vaginal microbiota essentially is the first inoculation of our gut. So going way, way, way back of just like how set up has your gut been from the very beginning? And that's no knock on cesarean birth or vaginal birth. It's just the reality of the situation is that, your microbiome and the how your gut has been set up may be different than, had you been vaginally birthed. And that may ultimately have an issue with, absorption or how well you're digesting or whether you're prone to bloating or, all of the different symptoms that we can experience, and then looking at medications and the chronic stress and like all the things that can impact our gut health. And when we have had these assault on the system, it's not able to do its job as well, right? So we're not able to break down those foods as completely. We're not able to absorb them as well. We might end up with this thing called leaky gut, which we can kind of talk about and break down what that actually even means, because I think that's kind of a trendy term as well.
Agreed.
Yeah.
So, okay, let me just repeat back,
Yeah.
just because I think maybe this will help everybody as well. There's kind of two pieces here. One is how much we can actually get from our food, which I'm assuming that when we talk about how much we can get from our food in terms of nutrients, this is where we want to be finding organic as often as possible. Maybe it's local farming and things like that. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, because I know that overuse of soil as well as conventional farming and all of that can deplete nutrients. So that's one piece. We got to take in the good stuff. And then you're saying we're also, I guess we could say it as taking in the bad stuff, which is causing the problem. So processed foods, medications, chronic stress, and all of that.
Exactly.
Yeah?
Yes, exactly.
Okay. So that makes sense to me. 100%. You surprised me a little bit with the birth information. That's new learning. So I love to learn something new. So let's talk about what happens when the gut is kind of faced with all these inflammatory things like processed food and medications and chronic stress, because we can't avoid it, right? There's no way to avoid all of that. We all have to live our lives. We might have to take a medicine or whatever. So what is happening then?
Yeah, so there's, a couple different things that can occur. So when we're consuming things from the outside world that are inflammatory to the system, 80% of our immune system, and that you may see like between like 70 and 90, that kind of depending on which study you're reading, but we'll call it an even 80. So 80% of your immune system actually lives in the gut, right? Which, going back to talking about what does the gut even do, that makes sense, right? Because we want to have a very clear filter of what we're allowing into our body, because essentially our digestive tract is open to the outside world. That's our filter. Thinking almost about it as a coffee filter, right? We want to be able to filter in the stuff that we need and that we can recognize that we then use to build ourselves. So things like vitamins, things like minerals, things like amino acids, or like the building blocks of carbohydrates, fats, or proteins, right? And so, but then we also want to filter out the, quote unquote bad stuff. So if there's pathogens, or if there's viruses, or if there's, anything that might be an assault on the system, we've got our front lines there and ready to go. So our immune system is housed in the gut for a really specific purpose, which is to protect you, right? Because we want to be very, very particular about what's coming into our bloodstream, right? Because that's like, that's a fast track to everywhere. So we want to make sure that we've got like a really good system in place to make sure that we're filtering correctly. Okay. So what can happen is that filter can get compromised. And that's where we run into some issues. So that essentially that filter, that compromised filter, is what we're talking about when we're talking about the term leaky gut. Okay. So our gut lining, like if you were to pull a hair from your head, like if you've ever had a split end, if you were to split that hair entirely in half, that half a hair is one cell thick. That's how thin our gut lining is.
Wow.
So it's a very, very thin lining that has a very, very big job, which is allowing the good stuff in and keeping the bad stuff out, right? Like that's its main goal. And so there are certain things that can disrupt that lining. That can be it almost acts as it's like an abrasion on that lining, right? So like if you're, I'm sure you can see this, but if you were to like see, if I put my hands together, underneath here would be your digestive tract. So this is the tube and this is your bloodstream, right? We want to make sure that we're filtering what comes in and what goes out. And that's basically our immune system. When we consume things like, a diet rich in ultra processed food. And I really want to be also clear about this. Like, I'm not demonizing these foods. It's not that they're good or that they're bad. There's just also a reality of the physiology behind it, right? So a caveat is like, examine your relationship to these foods. I'm not demonizing them. I'm not saying you can never have them, but certain things like diets high in sugar, diets high in ultra processed foods, diets high in gluten or high in pesticides and herbicides, those can basically punch holes in that really thin lining. So now you have, say you eat a strawberry, and strawberries really shouldn't be an offense to the system. Like our body should be able to totally digest that and be completely fine. But if that lining has been compromised and there have been holes punched in that, what happens is that now your immune system is interacting interacting with parts of that strawberry that it never would have in the past if that filter was working correctly, right? So now you're getting this low grade chronic inflammation, right? And when we talk about inflammation is just the immune system at work, right? Like if you sprain your ankle, you're going to get inflamed. It's going to become red, swollen, and that's on purpose, right? We want to send troops there. We want to go and rebuild and heal. So we need inflammation. Inflammation is a huge piece of the healing process. What happens is if you eat a donut once a month, your body can handle that. We're actually really resilient beings. Your body can totally handle that. So it comes in and the donut does the thing, and it's maybe not so nice and it's kind of abrasive on the system, but then our body mounts really beautiful immune response, and it mounts the inflammation response, and it comes in and it patches everything up and heals it. And then we go about our day. And then, the anti-inflammatory then comes in and finishes that cycle, right? So then we go back to quote unquote normal. The issue is that when we are experiencing that assault on the gut multiple times a day, every single day, right?
I
so if
see.
you wake up and you have, something for breakfast that's inflammatory, and then you're super stressed out about your job, and that's inflammatory to the system, because cortisol can actually be a part of that too. Cortisol being one of our primary stress hormones. It can be a part of, that assault on the gut lining as well. And then we have, Cheetos for a snack and, whatever. I'm not going to pick on food, but you get my point.
Yes.
We're constantly on this inflammatory train, such that the healing system, that cycle, that inflammation to anti-inflammation, we can't ever close the loop, right? So then we have a gut that's been compromised, which means that we're not absorbing, we're not digesting, and we're not eliminating often the foods that as completely as we would if we weren't riding that inflammation, right? It also means that those inflammatory compounds, right? Because our immune system is like there and ready and willing to fight. So it's just chronically being activated, which means that we have these inflammatory complexes, which are just part of the immune system, kind of bouncing around in the blood because they're like, it's like always mounting the immune response, right? And so that causes inflammation in other places, right? That's how we can see how, maybe hormones are impacted by our gut health, or our joint pain might be impacted by our gut health, or our brain fog might be impacted by our gut health, because these immune complexes are being mounted all the time and are just kind of in the blood. So it's like your whole system becomes inflamed. Does that make sense?
It does. And you have described it in such a nice visual way. That helps me, and I'm sure it'll help others. I'm imagining, I think I'm imagining some sort of children's video with little bubbles of immune responses flying around in the blood, but that's helpful. I get it.
No, 100%. Actually, Panda and I always joke that we should do like a cartoon, like animated of the body. That would be perfect. But yes, that's exactly it. That's what's happening at a physiological level. And that's also what we're talking about when we're talking about chronic inflammation, right? It's like, I think also that term gets thrown about, but what does it actually mean? This is like really the stem of it, and how everything really comes back to gut health is because of this process right here.
Part of healthy living is gut health. So much of our hormones, digestion, and nutrition centers around a healthy gut. Every morning, I use a green gut glow drink to make sure that my brain, skin, nails, hair, and gut are at their best, and to make sure that I get more veggies than I would eat otherwise. I felt a difference for sure. Grab yours or have a look at www.bit.ly/green gut glow plus, or just find it in the show notes. So is it fair to say that inflammation is really meant to be a healing response, but the problem is when it's going all the time, it's almost the opposite?
That's exactly right. Yes, that's
Okay.
exactly. So inflammation in the acute response is critical to healing. Like if you cut yourself, there's going to be inflammation, there's going to be swelling. Your body's going to send complexes. It's going to be able to build a scab, and then it's going to heal and repair and grow skin and like do all the things that we do in wound healing, right? And that inflammatory process is so important in getting that process started, right? But eventually that wound should heal, and then we should go to anti-inflammatory, right? We should be able to remove that and go back to baseline, right? What happens is we get stuck in the inflammation part of it. We don't ever get switched into anti-inflammation. And so we're just chronically, your body's doing the very best it can. It's been, it's trying to heal you. It's just, it's like its job just never gets finished, right? And so when we have chronic inflammation, that's where we get issues. That is the root of all disease.
That's amazing. I knew something about gut health, but the way you're describing it is really making sense. And so I know that's going to be the case for our listeners too. Really interesting. So you've almost said this, or you kind of have said this, but I'm going to ask it so that we just kind of flip to a list of things that people might recognize. So what are some symptoms that should really draw our attention to the fact that our gut health might not be where we want it to be at this point?
I have a list here.
Excellent.
So allergies, bloating, gas, brain fog, GERD, mood disorders, gastric ulcers, joint pain, diarrhea, irritable bowel syndrome, inflammatory bowel disease, SIBO, celiac disease, acute inflammation, chronic inflammatory conditions like arthritis, thyroid disorders. So are you catching my drift?
Yeah.
Like every single thing. If you are experiencing discomfort anywhere, you could probably go back to the gut, at least for a part of it, right? It's like, I'm not saying it's the panacea, but it actually maybe I am saying that. It really is. It's so critical. It's the beginning of it all, right? It's how we're getting the nutrients to rebuild and to repair. It's also, our immune system, right? It's like how busy is your immune system dealing with your gut that it can't go repair the other stuff.
Interesting. So let me pick something on that list because I definitely know mood, joint pain, bloating, swelling, puffiness, all those things. Absolutely. And you also listed some things that are more in my mind, I'm using air quotes, disease, like a thyroid condition or celiac or something like that. So in those cases, let's take a thyroid condition, when someone potentially has to have medication now because their thyroid is really not functioning, what does improving gut health do for them? Can it potentially reverse that, or does it make just it easier to live with?
Yeah. So when we talk about, the two that you sort of highlighted, so celiac disease and thyroid disease. So most cases of thyroid, you can have either hypothyroid, which means like an underfunctioning thyroid, or hyperthyroid. Most common people will get hypothyroid. And most often those cases of hypothyroid are Hashimoto's thyroiditis. Both of those are autoimmune disorders, right? We don't actually know. There are several theories out there around why autoimmune disorders exist, right? Why they happen, because ultimately it's a confused immune system. Our immune system has tons of checks and balances that really shouldn't be attacking our own tissue. Like its job is to say, are you me or are you not me? And if it's a me, it just, we float on by, all good, no need to attack it. If it's a not me, we plant a flag in it and we mount the troops, right?
Right.
And so then we're talking about what causes that immune system to get a little wonky, right? And if 80% of our immune system lives in our gut, then we can't ignore the fact that the gut would have a relationship.
True.
And in particular, thyroid in particular, so there's a huge connection between actually gluten and thyroid, because the molecules, they're called what are called molecular mimicry, which just means that the molecules mimic each other. They look similar. So if you're mounting an immune response to your thyroid and then you eat a bunch of gluten and it looks like thyroid tissue, your immune system is going to continue to make it looks just enough alike that your immune system is actually going to mount even more of a response toward that gluten, toward that thyroid. So it's just going to exacerbate your thyroid condition.
Wow. I am already in the gluten-free or low gluten camp, but I did not know this. That's very interesting. So what it comes down to is we don't want to confuse the immune response, really. We don't want the body to be trying to heal/attack something that it shouldn't be.
Totally. Yeah.
I feel like that's the theme of what you're saying.
Yeah. And we just want to give the immune system a break, right? Like we want it to work when it needs to, but it's not designed to be turned on all the time, right? It's just not designed to that. And you're right. It's like we can't live in a bubble, right? It's like you're never going to be exposed to foods or air pollution or medications or stress or all of the things that can play a role in our gut health. But it's how can we support it, right? How can we best support our system to be more resilient, things that we're going inevitably to bump up against, right? And so then we have to start thinking about that. Like, how do we actually build a stronger gut so that we can be more resilient to the fact that we're going to bump up against stuff that we don't necessarily have control over? And that's okay. It's like the goal of this is not to become afraid of food or afraid of life or afraid of stress. It's not about that, right? Because we will all bump up against that. And we really are resilient beings and our bodies want to heal. So how do we just best set it up in the places that we can manipulate, or that we can clean things up or have, don't love the word control because it's not about control. control, but it's about how can we be more mindful with our choices to best set our body up to win, right?
Right, right. I like that. And I like how you've emphasized a couple of times that we're not saying certain foods are bad. I fully agree with that. And there are things that I don't eat very often. And I've talked about this on a prior episode. I had some binge eating issues when I was younger. And so I have to be very careful how I think about food in a way that's healthy for me. And so this is kind of what I say as well. There are foods that we should not be eating 100% of the time. It doesn't make them bad. It makes them like the fun foods that we eat every now and then, and not the fuel foods that actually help us live. So I feel like we're saying something similar.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, and I had a history of an eating disorder too. So it's just like, I'm always really, really mindful of bridging that gap, right? Like, how do we eat for health, but also how do we eat in a way that doesn't like get a little bit wonky between the ears, right? So
Right.
being really mindful of that. So
Right. I appreciate that outlook for sure. So let's take this in a, okay, what can we do direction? So if people are noticing some of these symptoms and maybe thinking, oh, I'm not sure that I'm doing myself any good with what I'm eating and how I'm living, then what do you suggest?
yeah, I mean, I think first things first is more vegetables. You can't go wrong, right? We don't really have to focus on what you can't eat, but let's focus on what you can eat and the things that we can bring into our diet to maybe crowd out some of the other stuff or to provide more nutrients. Like, we really want to talk about nutrient density. And when we talk about nutrient density, that just means like per calorie of food, how much nutrition is cram packed into that, right? So the nutrient density of, say, broccoli is going to be really different than the nutrient density of a Cheeto, right? I'm not picking on Cheetos. Apparently I am today, but
we get it though. We get it.
but the nutrient density of each of those foods and what you will get out of it from a health standpoint is, there's tons of vitamins and minerals and phytochemicals and phytonutrients in that broccoli, but there's not a whole lot of that in the Cheeto. There might be some carbohydrates and some fat, some of the more micronutrient stuff, but we really want to talk about nutrient density. So choosing foods that are nutrient dense. So that looks like vegetables. That looks like lots of vegetables. When we think about building a plate, half your plate should be vegetables, right? And really predominantly looking at the non-starchy vegetables. So things like broccoli and cauliflower and asparagus and leafy greens are another huge one. And then, and really thinking about food as medicine, right? It's not just because vegetables, are good for you or whatever, right? It's like there is so much cram packed into that is medicine, right? That is supporting our health. So really focusing on that, right? More vegetables, I think, is always a good place to start. High quality proteins are also a really good place to be. If you are choosing to eat meat, being conscious of the quality of the meat and how those animals were treated and raised. And then high quality fats. So things like nuts and seeds, things like avocados, things like olives, olive oil, coconut oil, avocado oil. If you focus on that of like high quality protein, high quality fats, and tons of vegetables, you'll be solid.
I love that. And it's kind of what we all know we should be doing anyway, right? So eat your vegetables, everyone. Now, I know that we're getting a little bit tight on our time, but as you were saying that, I was also thinking that I know that I personally like to add probiotics and digestive enzymes to my diet. So is that something that you typically suggest for people that they want probiotics, or is that really an individual basis type of thing?
I would say, like, generally speaking, we have pretty poor microbiomes for lots of different reasons, but I would say, generally speaking, everyone should be on a probiotic, save for like if you had SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. There may be a few situations, but if you take probiotic and you feel way worse and they make you super bloated, then maybe reach out to a physician. But I would say most people can tolerate that. And if you don't want to take a supplement, really building that microbiome. So the ways that we're going to do that is when we talk about prebiotics and probiotics. Okay, so probiotics are the actual bugs, like that. Those are the actual bacteria that do all kinds of jobs for us. They create neurotransmitters, they create vitamins and minerals, they talk to our cells. Like, they are an organ system of their own that are incredibly important to health. So we need to make sure that we're getting enough of those bugs, right? We want to populate the garden, but then we want to have the garden grow, right? So how we get the garden to grow is we actually have to feed these bugs. And I read a study recently that said 30% of what you eat actually goes to feeding your microbiome.
Wow.
Which is a huge percentage. Yeah. But that's just how important these bugs are to us and how much your body will prioritize that. So these little critters love fiber, right? They love vegetables, right? Those are the prebiotics. So things like Jerusalem artichokes, things like even purple potatoes, these resistant starches, those are going to feed that microbiome. So all vegetables, all fiber is going to be a huge way to keep that garden growing, right? We want to repopulate because there's been some disruption of that microbiome. So we want to make sure that we're replacing those bugs if they've been killed off by antibiotic use or whatever. But then once we have repopulated, we really want to make sure that we're feeding them. And another way to do that is through fermented foods. So that will also, in lieu of a probiotic supplement, things like sauerkraut, pickles, kombucha, kefir, those kinds of things are going to be the probiotic that's going to be actually giving your gut the bacteria.
Excellent. I'm so glad we added that in because I know fermented foods are becoming popular for sure. So now we know why.
Yes, I would totally say fermented foods daily. That could be, a tablespoon of sauerkraut. It doesn't have to be a ton, but some sort of fermented food every day would be really, really important. And the other one I would say, if you really want to do service to your gut to help heal that lining, bone broth is another really, really good one that helps to heal that lining. So bone broth every day, half your plate of vegetables, high quality proteins, high quality fats, fermented foods, really supporting that microbiome. I would say, it doesn't have to be hard. It's just, going back to the basics.
And paying attention, I guess, maybe being more, what's the word I'm looking for? More, apparently I need more healthy foods to make my brain work, more intentional. That's what I wanted to say.
Totally. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. And pay attention to how you feel, right? It's like your body will be your true north. There's a million diets out there and there's not just one diet for everyone, but those are the basics to start with. And then pay attention to how your body feels. Like that's what will tell you the most about your health is your physical body, right? Get in touch with that.
Yes, I agree with that. And the reason that I ended up kind of taking gluten out of my diet for the most part is that I realized it was making me so sleepy. And I didn't know that until I stopped eating it and didn't get so sleepy anymore. So you can tell how you feel for sure.
And then that becomes an empowered choice, right? Like not just cutting it out because it's quote unquote bad or because some doctor on a podcast told you not to, right? It's like give yourself the opportunity to play with it, get curious around what works for you and what doesn't. And if cutting it out makes you feel better, great. If it doesn't, great. Then eat it. That's the beauty of individualized medicine, right? Like go into your little body, ask it how it's doing, and pay attention to the foods that you're eating, whether it's setting you up to feel your best or not.
Great point. And this feels like a good time to say to people listening, if you have a medical situation that you're concerned about, please don't just take our word for it. Go and see your doctor. Contact Katie online if you'd like to, but make sure that you get appropriate medical advice, certainly.
Yeah, these are just sweeping generalizations. So
yes, so that we have the basics. Now, do you think we missed anything as far as the basics of gut health that you were thinking of?
I don't think so. I mean, the basics, and this could be a whole other podcast in itself, but it's just stress management, you guys, paying attention to your stress levels. Our gut and our brain are intimately connected. And so meditation, walking, deep breathing, I mean, all of these things are going to have a huge, maybe the biggest impact on your gut health. Food is, I would say, a good 30% of it, because of what we're actually putting into our bodies, but it's not the end all and be all. It's just kind of the more acute thing that we can shift most immediately. Some of the other stuff like the stress management tools, those take time to learn and to implement. But I would say addressing stress is also a huge base for gut health.
Wow, that does feel like a whole nother episode right there, but I'm glad we touched on it.
Yes, yeah, I would be remiss not to mention it, but yeah, we can go into much further detail about that.
Right. Okay. Well, let me just make sure that I don't forget to ask you the question that I always ask everyone, because I am creating a Spotify playlist of songs that just make us happy, put us in a better mood. I think music is powerful in that way. And now that you've just mentioned stress management, maybe this is completely appropriate. So what is your favorite song to put you in a good mood?
Oh, I would say pretty much anything by James Taylor, but I really love Carolina, or it's like Going to Carolina in my mind or whatever. I forget the actual title, but that one always puts me in a good mood.
I love it. And you know what fascinates me about asking this question is every single person says something completely different. So it's becoming a really cool playlist of all kinds of variety. So James Taylor, I love it. No one has said that.
Oh, amazing. That's so fun. Oh, I can't wait to see the Spotify playlist.
Yes, I do share it on my Instagram. So everybody, if you're looking for this playlist, you want to know where it is, go to my Instagram and you'll see it, but you can also search in Spotify. It's called Mood Lift, OMG Teach Me. So yeah, absolutely. It's fun. And listeners, you can submit a song too. A few of my listeners have messaged me and said, oh my gosh, you have to put this one or that one on there. So it's growing. Yeah.
How fun. That's such a good idea.
I just love mood music, peppy music. So it kind of came out of talking about that one day, and it's been really fun. Yeah.
That's such a good question.
So that is it for us today. And I so appreciate this because the way that you describe visually what we're talking about when we're talking about gut health, I think is really going to help a lot of people sort of sift through all the madness that is inflammation and gut health and stress hormones and all of that. So I really, really appreciate that.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that too. I just making this as pun intended digestible as possible, for people.
Maybe that needs to be in the title, making gut health digestible. Well, awesome. Thank you so much. And everybody have a look at the show notes. Make sure to find Dr. Katie Collier on Instagram, as well as on her website, which is drkatiecollier.com. And maybe we'll do this again about another one of these topics at some point.
Oh, I would love that. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. I sure hope you enjoyed today's episode. OMG, I would be so honored if you would take a moment, leave a rating, and leave a review. Let's get this message out further into the world. Make sure you've subscribed as well, and why not grab a screenshot and share it on your social media. Now it's time to head down to the show notes and see the resources I mentioned. Go find what you love.